Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Substack Live. It's really good to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts and reflections and questions about the topic of creative courage. So, welcome, Josh. I can see you've joined. Really good to have you here. And I guess we'll have more people joining as as they join from the email invitation, I hope. So, usually when I do these Substack lives, I call them stories of creative courage, and I invite a guest and we have a conversation. And I've had so many of these conversations that have been really inspiring, uplifting. They have been real fuel for thought and conversation. Hello, Lena. Good to have you here. Hello, Josh. I can see you're here too. Real fuel for conversation. And we've really dug into creative courage, what it means, what gets in the way. And when I first started doing these live conversations, the first one was really nerve wracking. And then they got easier. And I've always loved them, and they became really easy to host, to go live, and I'd sort of forget about the audience because I was just concentrating on the other person. And then it occurred to me that if I'm here as a stand for creative courage, then what I need to do is actually harness my own creative courage. And it seemed really clear to me that the way to do that was to come on and do a solo live and talk about, I suppose, what creative courage means to me. All right. So I'm used to hosting guests and inviting their contributions and their insights. And really believe in that. And so I really want to make this as well a co created conversation. So I really want to invite you to drop a message into the comments, to respond to questions as they come up. And we can hopefully get this loop going of conversation. Even though you're not with me in person, I can speak to those questions. And I also have lots of insights that have been shared with me since I put this out on Substack and in various platforms. Like, what does creative courage mean to you? So I have insights and thoughts to share, and I'll weave those in as we go along. Um, so creative courage, yeah. Thank you, Rebecca. Great topic. I mean, I love this. I've come to see that this is really what I want to explore in my work in supporting people, because I see a real need for resources and support around courage for creativity. And so there are two parts really to thinking about this. So one is creativity and what is it? What do we mean by it? And the other is courage and how do we begin to harness that? And what happens if we can muster our courage and really step up? And then also what happens when we don't? Like, what is the impact? And yeah, it's true that it's different feeling asking questions versus being the one answering them. I agree. It's courageous. It feels courageous to me to stand in this space as a solo, and all the thoughts and all the feelings are coming up from me, and yet I need to walk the walk if I'm going to work in this territory of creative courage. So let's begin by thinking about what creativity is. And if you're willing, I would love you to write in the comments what creativity means to you. Give me your definitions. I'd love to hear. And while you're doing that, I just want to read out a few definitions that I've been given by various people that I've worked with over the years, because I think there's such a broad definition. It so depends on our context, on who we are as a person. There are a million different definitions of creativity. So I just want to share a few with you, and then I'll kind of give you my own definition of what creativity is for me. But I had one client who said any thinking out of the box is creativity for me. Anything that shows us stepping outside of the rules, if you like, with breaking the rules. Creativity is energizing and playful. It's surprise. It's seeing the world afresh. and finding ways to communicate that vision with others to encourage them to re-engage with the world in new ways. I love that definition. And there are some coming through now. So, welcome, Alicia. Good to see you here. We're talking about creativity and what it means to us. So, if you want to contribute to that, that would be great. Josh says, true connection to our nature of flow. Love that one. Rebecca says, creativity is the freedom to make something in whatever way we like. Yeah, absolutely. Juin, expressing my feelings arising from my relationships with other parts of nature. Fantastic. Elvia, creativity is a form of self-expression. Yeah, I mean, keep them coming. These are all really wonderful definitions. And what I see under the surface of that, like what connects all of those things, to me, is this feeling of aliveness. Right? Creativity is something that allows us to feel alive. That to me feels really fundamental. And so often, in these stories of creative courage conversations that I've had with various people, various creatives over the months, what comes up is this common theme about it's not just an artistic practice. So it's not just I'm painting a painting, I'm writing a book. It is to do with how we express our uniqueness, our individualism. And for me, creativity feels like a birthright. And I think it's fundamental to being human, because I think it's the way that as humans, as we've evolved, from the very tiny amoebas that began, that where we started from, as we've evolved the capacity to ideate and to use our imaginations. And so for me, fundamentally at heart, creativity is evolutionary, right? It's us constantly moving into the sphere of innovation, of new territories and new spaces and new forms. So that's a definition for me. Um, and again, I think, we can, we're blessed with this capacity of imagination. And if we think about it in that way, then we're constantly moving into possibility. And that for me is a really, that's what brings me alive anyway, in terms of creativity. So by creativity, I don't necessarily mean making a thing. I think often there's a lot of focus on the doing, and the product at the end of it. Our culture really privileges what we do. It privileges the things we make, the products, the artifacts. And for me, creativity is as much a way of being as it is about doing. So I think we can make something, just for the joy of being alive and for the joy of self-expression, as so many of you in the comments have said. But it's a kind of unfurling of who we're becoming. It's constantly becoming. Um, yeah, and so Elvia is saying creativity is discovery. I absolutely agree. I think it's how we discover who we are and the world around us as well, to expand. So I guess what I want to do now is to move into an inquiry about what gets in the way. So if creativity is all of those things, one thing I constantly see is that we want to be more creative, but we can't. Right. So we want to make things, we want to express ourselves, we want to discover, we want to evolve and grow, but something gets in the way. And so I'd love to know from you, if you want to type into the comments, what for you gets in the way of your creativity? What comes up when you feel that need or desire to express and you feel you can't for whatever reason? So I'll share some thoughts with you, as I'm giving you time to maybe share your insights. I feel like often the stories around what blocks our creativity are very much around the external factors. We say, "Well, I don't have enough time. I'm too busy." Or we kind of constantly long for this big block of time, the one day a week when we are free to create, or the holiday where we'll finally sit down and begin writing that story. We maybe think about we procrastinate. But yeah, as you're beginning to say, as you're beginning to share here, it's really the internal stuff that's getting in the way. So Alicia's talking about limiting self-belief, and Lena's talking about the fear of being judged by yourself or others. And so often what I find in my work, working to support creatives, is there's a story, there's a kind of, oh, I don't have enough time, or I procrastinate. But when we dig down to the deeper levels, we see that really what gets in the way is fear. Fear of ourselves, perhaps, that limiting self-belief. We're too afraid to be visible, to really show our true colors. And with the fear of being judged by others too. Um, so it's the internal messages that I'm interested in as someone who works with creatives. Like, how do we get to the bottom of that? And how do we begin to excavate those internal limiting beliefs, those thoughts, those kind of stories that we tell ourselves? And so I believe in beginning with the core fears. Like, what are the core fears that hold you back? What is it that you're protecting yourself by doing? So we have these fears that we're afraid of being judged. We develop these defense mechanisms that cluster around that, and behaviors that prevent us. Then it's our brains keeping us safe, right? So we procrastinate because we tell ourselves there are other things that we need to do instead of really diving into the thing that we want to do and the thing we want to create. The inner critic shows up, as Julian's saying as well. So there's an unconscious belief that our worth as a human being rests entirely upon the quality of that creative output. I agree completely. It's like the stakes are too high. We feel like there's too much pressure. Um, and what if we don't show up as perfect? What if we don't show up as having all of the answers? And so we develop these behaviors that get in the way of all of that. I wanted to share with you a story from just an exchange on Substack notes that I had just in the last few days with Gabriella Blandy. Shout out to Gabriella. I don't think she's here, but she's a wonderful Substacker. So go find her Substack. And she sort of gives an example which I think really brings it to life. And she says, I sit down and I want to share a note, and I feel strongly that I want to share. But the history in my mind and my body causes me to think, wait, is this note interesting enough? Right? Maybe people will think it's boring. Like, oh, so maybe I shouldn't write it. Or, another part of her might ask, shouldn't there be an accompanying image? Like, should there be a picture? That's what everyone else is doing. And so these limiting beliefs, these questions, this self-doubt, these inner critical voices cause that wobble. How many of us recognize that situation? I certainly do, for sure. So if you have like examples you want to share, then feel free to do that. But I just think that's a really great tangible example from Gabriella. And it's just a small thing like writing a note on Substack, but all the time we're kind of hooked into these messages. We're driven from these core fears. Um, Other things that have come up when I've talked to people about this. Someone recently said to me, I don't know how to ask the right questions. And when we kind of talked about that a little bit further, what came across was the fear of being judged, of feeling stupid or being judged as silly or inconsequential in some way. So holding back in questioning as well. So it's not just on the page or in a creative process or practice, but just showing up as ourselves, being creative in the way we engage with other people in our relationships, all of these things that prevent us, these things that get in the way the whole time. So here's what I think about creative courage, and I'm really keen to have your responses to this. Yeah, thank you, Josh. A development of trust in ourselves. Absolutely. It's about beginning to trust and about allowing in these aspects of ourselves that we don't feel comfortable. We don't feel comfortable feeling not good enough or not having the answers. We need to develop that trust. I absolutely agree. So that's a beautiful segue into where I'm going next, which is creative courage, what it is. It's not about eradicating fear. It took me a long time to figure out that. I think I wanted to get rid of fear altogether. And of course, that's not possible because we are human beings who've evolved to stay safe, to not be eaten by predators. And so we work with a kind of brain that is in many ways quite primitive. And yet we're bringing that primitive brain into the sphere of creativity. So we feel like we're on high alert. We feel as though it's so risky. And in fact, when we really dig into that, we find it's not true. So it's not about having no fear. It's about recognizing what's been blocking you, your creative expression. And I think it's about coming to see fear as a kind of compass. I've written about this before. What is the fear pointing you towards? Because in my experience, if we're feeling fear, we're kind of at the edge of our capacity, of our comfort zone. And to be able to evolve, we need to push beyond the safe, the familiar, the comfortable. So it's creative courage, I think, is choosing to act anyway. It's recognizing the limitations, it's recognizing the places where we contract, it's noticing how they have served us through our life and how they've kept us safe and thriving, and yet choosing to create anyway, even with that fear as part of the whole piece. But crucially, I think, for all of us, choosing to do that with support. So one of the reasons I started the conversation series, Stories of Creative Courage, is because I recognize that I felt very strongly that we need to have these conversations in public. We need to support each other and witness each other in our vulnerability and be able to say, yes, me too. I also feel that fear. So to find that support, witnesses, people who see us for who we are, and often the fear that we have is not, it doesn't come true, does it? We feel the fear, and yet actually other people have a completely different perspective. They are more likely to see us in our essence, in our light. So having a support, having a structure, and increasingly, I believe that, community is a really important part of this. We're a community right here in having this conversation. And I'm very grateful to all of you for coming and, co-creating this conversation with me. So for me, it's a continual kind of stepping into the fear, not avoiding it, not pushing it to one side, and creating from that place where fear is invited in, fear is welcome. Because if I can work my way through and navigate it, then I'm going to grow on the other side of that. So how do we express from that place? How do we integrate the fear into what we're wanting to express? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. So again, please feel free to share. That would be great. So I've sort of been thinking about this for quite a long time, this issue of creative courage. And for me, I've come to see it as it is a journey, but it's also a continual spiral of a journey in that way that, we don't live in a linear way. We keep coming back, and we keep starting again and going round the spiral, maybe through the experience, seeing things a little bit differently the second or the third or the fourth time round. So there's a continual loop, I think. And for me, there are four principles of creative courage. And the first principle is seeing. So we need to see ourselves. We need to really be able to see ourselves and see ourselves in our wholeness. So that includes inviting the fear in. So one conversation I often have in my groups is, meeting your creative self. Who is your creative self? Who are you in your best essential self? Like, what is it that you're creating? Who is it that you want to be? Um, And as Jewin says, by listening to our creative self, but not over identifying with it, asking what that part needs. What does the fear need to feel safe? Like, how can we calm the fear down? So, seeing ourselves in our wholeness, I think, is the first stage of entering this arena of creative courage. The second principle, I think, is believing. And so this is where that concept of trust comes in that Josh has pointed to there. How do we believe in ourselves more? That's a tricky one. For me, it's taken a very long time to develop the capacity to trust myself above all else and to really trust what it is that I'm creating. So for me, what I find helpful is to really connect to what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Who am I creating this for? Who am I connecting with? And so, as Elvia says as well, there's a way of engaging with fear that doesn't push us into fright or flight. If we push hard, then our brains just like go into overdrive. If we can take a small step, then we can move towards that edge of comfort zone, as we talked about earlier. So the belief, I think, is we begin to believe more when we can slowly move towards what it is that we're fearful of and incorporate that. And as Lena says, understanding why the fear is there, not letting it run the show, but just accepting it. So belief, seeing is the first step, believing is the second step. And the more we practice and take those incremental steps, the more our brains sort of get the signal that it's safe. And also then we begin to develop, I think, a more robust belief system in ourselves. I want to come back to Gabriella and talk about her experience. So she talks about, if you remember, she was writing the Substack note and all these fears were coming up and she had this wobble. And then she remembers, oh, creativity shows me all of myself. And in that thought, she's brought back to presence and back to this sense of the creative energy flowing through her that just wants to be expressed. Like expression doesn't have any thinking or limiting beliefs. It just wants to express because it's evolutionary. So by connecting to that impulse to express and allowing ourselves to kind of move forward, even with the fear, that is what creates the belief, I feel. And then I think what happens is we're invited to love ourselves as a whole. And that I feel is such a rich and juicy way to live life. Yeah. So we are, by stepping into our creative courage, we're inviting ourselves to love ourselves as whole and believing that we're valid, believing in what it is we have to share with the world. Okay. So we have seeing and we have believing. And then from there, we have doing, which is the next aspect or element, I think, of creative courage. And it's not that we've not been doing all the way along, but I think once we have that belief, we can then begin to see the action that we take, the tasks that we're doing, the creation of the thing. It takes on this sense of we're becoming who we want to be by taking action. So we want to believe in ourselves more. We want to express. We want to create. So we bolster ourselves through harnessing our courage and finding the faith to move forward. And then we move forward, as someone said, in tiny steps and incremental steps, moving forward. So the doing phase is not just doing for the sake of it, but it's doing in service of who we want to become. And that notion of becoming is for me, the final element in this whole model or framework, if you like, of creative courage. Like we then become. So for me, that means the labels drop away. You know, I was having a conversation earlier today on a different live with someone and saying that for me, I realized that the more creative I feel, the more I step into my creativity, the more it's because I can allow the labels and the identities to dissolve. So at one point in my life, I over identified with being an academic, for example, a professor, a university professor. That label, that identity has dissolved. Then I became a writer and I identified with being a writer, and that one has dissolved also. And so it's about who are we in the world? Who are we becoming? And for me now, for me, it's more that I want to bring my essential self to everything that I do. It doesn't matter what I call myself. It doesn't matter, um, the labels just don't matter. But for me, the ways that I show up are in my essence, when I'm at my best and when I can work with the fear and collaborate with it. So for me, that means approaching things from a place of love. It means creating love. It means showing up in my wisdom to discern and hopefully to be a resource to inspire people and to help them transform. It also means being a leader, and this is another part of my essence as well, I think. And I say that it's very, very triggering and vulnerable to say that live, but that is a word that I was given as part of my essence, and so I'm sharing it with you in the spirit of yeah, stepping into my own creative courage. For me, leadership means I harness my courage to be able to create spaces where I can orchestrate and conduct people towards their own self-expression. Sometimes I think of it as being like a lightning rod and pulling people towards their vision and their purpose. And so that's what I mean by essence, really. I'm no longer a writer. I don't even think of myself as a coach anymore. That label, I've struggled with that for quite a long time. But thank you, Josh, for yeah, for that observation. You're leading us now beautifully. Yeah, this leadership is it's this idea of being a leader, of being there in my wisdom, in my love. Um, that's more like who I am. Um, Nina says, "You're an amazing creative leader of our creativity." Yeah, thank you. And again, it's co-created always. So this is a co-created space. The sessions where I'm working with people, whether it's one-to-one or in a group, they are co-created. It's the energy that we all bring. And then I think as well, for me, increasingly, um, listening to my own intuition, listening to what needs to come and be surfaced in a conversation is really about co-creating with the divine. And in the end, that is where I'm more and more attuning to, I think, in my work. Like, where is the divine in this conversation? How am I collaborating with an energy or an entity that is beyond who I am as an individual person? Um, Not to decry the importance of the unique individual, because I think we're all amazing and unique, and everybody has, you know, so much to offer. If we all operate from essence, then there's this incredible, I think, force and energy and power that is possible to make change and to initiate change in the world. But so to kind of to find that power from somewhere else, somewhere that's mysterious and not always visible and not material is is more and more, I think, where I think the power of creativity comes from. So, for me, ultimately, creative courage is really about seeing the creativity as connected to your becoming. Who are you becoming? Who do you want to become? It's this opportunity that we all have to evolve, to create things that don't already exist, or to maybe put things together in combinations that don't already exist, to move into empty spaces, both in terms of the creations that we make, whether that's a piece of art or a book, or whether it's a conversation like this one. This is a creative act, and we might have a business. that we want to create. We might have an event that we want to run, an experience that we want to share with people. These are all creations. And so, who you want to become, your vision for who you want to be, is, I think, the creation is the container for you to become who you are and who you are evolving into being, that constantly through life until, I think, the day we die. So that is my little take on creative courage. I could say a lot more about how I work. Maybe I'll save that for another live. This conversation is really about me coming on here and walking the walk, and sharing with the Substack community some thoughts on what creativity and what creative courage mean to me. um, yeah, I mean, if there are any more comments before we wrap up, then those are all very welcome. But I hope that this has been interesting to you in some way, maybe inspiring. I hope there'll be more of these. I feel like this is the start of things to come, and there are always many, many more stories of creative courage from so many of the amazing creative people that I know. So watch out for more of those coming too. And obviously feel free to reach out. Like, I'd love, if you leave this conversation and feel like there's something that you wanted to share, that you felt was that you would love to express, then get in touch via Substack, via email, however. I'm easily findable on Substack, and I would love to hear from you. And let's keep this conversation going. I feel like, I hope this is the beginning. There's this feedback loop, right? Of, here I am making a creation. Here are you. I'm connecting with you. I am dependent on you, because there's this loop of creator and recipient. And so, thank you all for taking part in that loop, and contributing in so many wonderful ways. Great to be with you this evening, and I shall see you next time. Thank you all.